Welcome to the Kottke Ride Home for Monday, June 7th, 2021. I'm Jackson Bird. SpaceX just delivered a bunch of tardigrades and baby squids to the International Space Station. New research finding pupil size is an indicator of intelligence, and why it seems like vaccine lotteries are actually working. Here are some of the cool things from the news today. Tardigrades and cephalopods. Those were the VIPs on board SpaceX's 22nd cargo resupply mission to the International Space Station this past Thursday. Like other strange species that get blasted off our planet on the regular, these little dudes are taking the trip so that scientists can study how spaceflight and microgravity affects the organisms, with the ultimate goal of learning more about how those conditions also affect the other main biological denizens of space, the astronauts. Quoting NASA, tardigrades, known as water bears due to their appearance under a microscope and common habitat in water, are tiny creatures that tolerate environments more extreme than most life forms can. That makes them a model organism for studying biological survival under extreme conditions on Earth and in space. In addition, researchers have sequenced the genome of the tardigrade and developed methods for measuring how different environmental conditions affect tardigrade gene expression. The results could advance understanding of the stress factors affecting humans in space and support development of countermeasures. Spaceflight can be a really challenging environment for organisms, including humans, who have evolved to the conditions on Earth, says principal investigator Thomas Boothby. One of the things we're really keen to do is understand how tardigrades are surviving and reproducing in these environments, and whether we can learn anything about the tricks that they're using and adapt them to safeguard astronauts. End quote. And as for the cephalopods, or glow-in-the-dark baby bobtail squid to be exact, they'll be part of the cleverly titled project Understanding of Microgravity on Animal-Microbe Interactions, or UMAMI. Quoting NPR, scientists will study whether microgravity has an impact on the relationship between newly hatched bobtail squid and their symbiotic bacterium. The goal is to use what they learn about the relationship between squid and the microbes to help better prepare astronauts for lengthy space missions and preserve their health while they're out there. The experiment could also lead to a new understanding of the ways animals and helpful microbes interact, and may even have applications for improving health on Earth, NASA said. End quote. Jalopnik, meanwhile, is convinced this particular research project could lead to an outright squid takeover of humans now that we've unleashed them in space, giving them, quote, a level playing field with humans for the first time. As both humans and squid are not meant to be up there, squid, however, are made to float through featureless space, so they do have an advantage, end quote. Now, this far-fetched joke is based in like a hint of reality. Quoting further, octopi, squid, and other cephalopods like the cuttlefish have scary intelligence that predates our own by millions of years. They're only held back from dominating this planet by their need to be in the ocean. End quote. And Jalopnik then references the work of Harvard professor Peter Godfrey Smith, who spoke with The Guardian in 2017, and noted how good octopuses in particular are at sophisticated types of learning, but that we're not sure how good they are because it's tough to get them into a lab, and when you do, they often refuse to participate. That mischievous tendency, as well as a demonstrated curiosity, skills at recognizing different humans, and ability to escape from captivity, all represent high forms of intelligence. So they better watch out on the ISS because these little bobtail squid could just make the place their own. But until they do, NASA will be conducting many other experiments on board the spacecraft that this latest resupply mission has provided equipment for. That includes researching the increased susceptibility that some crew members exhibit for kidney stones during flight, installing new solar panels, and getting into TikTok. Targeted improved cotton through on-orbit cultivation, that is, TICTOC, TikTok. I think they knew what they were doing when they named it, though. TikTok is hoping to identify root growth patterns that could lead to cotton that is produced more efficiently with less impact on the environment. In other NASA news, today, NASA's Juno space probe will be getting closer to Jupiter's biggest moon, Ganymede, than the space agency has gotten in 2 decades. Quoting The Verge, Ganymede is bigger than Mercury and the only moon in the solar system with its own magnetosphere, which NASA describes as a bubble-shaped region of charged particles that surrounds it. The Juno cam, which has taken many of the most striking photos of Jupiter during its mission, will only be able to snap about 5 images during the flyby, since Ganymede will appear and fade from view all within a 25-minute window. 3 hours before Juno gets to its closest point near Ganymede, its science instruments will begin collecting data. End quote. Even though it's a small period of time that will result in only a few images, principal investigator Scott Bolton says it will be capturing Ganymede in ways never before possible and bringing our exploration of the largest moon in the solar system into the 21st century. Maybe we'll learn some valuable information about Ganymede that would put it on our list of candidates for places to escape to when the Squids take over. The studies are in, and apparently size does matter. Pupil size, that is. A series of studies have shown a correlation between the size of an individual's pupils and how well that individual scored on cognitive tests measuring reasoning, attention, and memory. Now, I'll just say at the top here that I'm never a huge fan of anything that claims to quantify someone's intelligence, but these studies were nonetheless intriguing. So first, so we're all on the same page here, quoting Scientific American, pupil size refers to the diameter of the black circular aperture in the center of the eye. It can range from around 2 to 8 millimeters. The pupil is surrounded by the colorful area known as the iris, which is responsible for controlling the size of the pupil. Pupils constrict in response to bright light, among other things. End quote. Those other things that pupils can respond to include arousal, interest in something, and mental exhaustion. Scientific American notes that the FBI even uses pupil dilation as a factor to determine if someone is lying. Now, to the researchers' credit, they didn't set out trying to find some physical marker of intelligence. They were originally studying the differences in mental effort put forth by people completing memory tasks. And they used an established technique of measuring pupil dilation as their marker of effort, and that is why they noticed a correlation between baseline pupil size and intelligence. So they shifted gears and conducted several studies with more than 500 people aged 18 to 35 in which they measured their pupils using an eye tracker, first while staring at a blank computer screen and then while completing a series of tests to measure fluid intelligence, working memory capacity, and attention control. And they found that a larger baseline pupil size did indeed correlate with greater abilities in all 3 of those categories, although the memory capacity one was the weakest. They also found that pupil size negatively correlated with age, meaning older participants had smaller pupils. And as a reminder, their oldest participants were 35, so yikes. The difference was apparent enough, they say, to be seen with the naked eye. But what's really behind this observed correlation? Here's what the researchers think, quoting again, pupil size is related to activity in the locus coeruleus, a nucleus situated in the upper brainstem with far-reaching neural connections to the rest of the brain. The locus coeruleus releases norepinephrine, which functions as both a neurotransmitter and hormone in the brain and body, and it regulates processes such as perception, attention, learning, and memory. It also helps maintain a healthy organization of brain activity so that distant brain regions can work together to accomplish challenging tasks and goals. Dysfunction in the locus coeruleus and the resulting breakdown of organized brain activity has been related to several conditions, including Alzheimer's disease and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In fact, this organization of activity is so important that the brain devotes most of its energy to maintain it, even when we're not doing anything at all, such as when we stare at a blank computer screen for minutes on end. One hypothesis is that people who have larger pupils at rest have greater regulation of activity by the locus coeruleus, which benefits cognitive performance and resting state brain function. End quote. An interesting hypothesis, and one which researchers say they are exploring further. And I'll just add in here, since they mentioned Alzheimer's, some breaking news as I was sitting down to record. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration just approved the first Alzheimer's treatment to slow cognitive decline. No new treatment for Alzheimer's has been approved since 2003, and this one, called aducanumab, is the very first that is meant to slow and alter the course of the disease, not just treat symptoms. So this marks a huge moment in the research into and treatment of Alzheimer's, but some are saying there is not enough evidence that it actually works. So the FDA has mandated they do a post-approval study to confirm its efficacy. Why approve it in the first place then? Well, quoting the Washington Post, the requirement, part of a program called Accelerated Approval, is designed to allow for earlier approval of drugs that treat serious or life-threatening conditions and meet an unfilled medical need. Such approvals are based on a surrogate endpoint, in this case, the medication's ability to reduce clumps of amyloid plaque in the brain, a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, end quote. It also tends to mean that the FDA has decided the benefits outweigh the risks. Debates are still ongoing among experts, however, and the medication will be enormously expensive, but even just the attention it receives from approval could bolster support and investments for Alzheimer's research in general. So, huge news, possible big turning point, but like with everything else, much more complicated than it seems from the headlines. I've mentioned it a few times here, and I'm sure you're hearing about it everywhere else, especially if you're in the US, but states, cities, and private companies are offering freebies left and right if people get their vaccines. And the ones being made fun of the most heavily tend to be the big lottery-style ones, starting with Ohio, who announced 5 people who got vaccines would be winning $1 million. How could this really make a difference? How could such a slim chance at something really convince someone to get a vaccine? Like either you think they should care more about their own health and that of others and not be convinced by a lottery, or maybe if they're hesitant about or opposed to the vaccine, isn't agreeing to do it for a shot at money, abandoning their values? And you're really going to do it for an almost impossible chance at something versus a guaranteed free donut or pint of beer. It just doesn't make sense on the surface. And yet, it's working. Ohio saw a 49% increase in vaccinations after announcing their lottery, and while the data is harder to track for all-or-nothing offerings from private companies, it does seem to be working. And Wired reports that, actually, according to behavioral economists, this does all add up. Lotteries don't make sense on the surface because a lottery ticket is barely worth anything, but people value them much more highly than their expected value or what they cost to the state. Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler calls lotteries like a cheap dream. People value the chance of that dream pretty highly. It gets more complicated for vaccines, though. There's the whole ethical side of bribing people to get a shot, yes, but also because the cost to play isn't money. It's time and potential side effects. Quoting Wired, economists see lotteries and other inducements in a whole different way. Some people need reasons to justify their behaviors and make decisions. That idea is called reason-based choice. Vaccines are scarce in most of the world, but widely available in the United States. If someone hasn't gotten one yet, maybe they're just an anti-vaxxer, in which case a lottery ain't gonna help. But different kinds of hesitancy are sensitive to different kinds of interventions. Some people, like in the Black community, have historical reasons to distrust the medical establishment, and that requires a different kind of outreach to fix. And some people, maybe they're busy, or they procrastinate, or they're worried about side effects, or they're anywhere else on the spectrum of hesitancy. Some motivational change might, nudge them to get a shot. End quote. So yes, there's ways to overcome some of those different hesitancies with community outreach, more convenient and accessible vaccine sites, better websites, etc. But for the ones who just need that nudge, Wired points out that smaller prizes like a freebie or even something to the tune of $100 just isn't enough to sway people. And part of it, in theory, is that if you give someone something for free or at a discounted rate, that's the price they start to assign to it. And the idea of a possible, if distant, win is valued much more heavily in most people's minds. Therefore, the value of this reward that they're getting from the vaccine is greater in the possibility of winning $1 million than in the guarantee of a free beer. And the lottery also costs way less to the state or company than some of these freebies, especially something like giving every vaccinated person $50. take Ohio, for example. They spent $5.6 million in prize winnings on their Vax-A-Million program, and then, because they were first to do it and it caused such a stir, Governor DeWine's press secretary said they ended up with the equivalent of $25.8 million worth of earned media coverage. So probably no more than $6 million total spent. If they decided to give out $50 to anyone ages 16 and up who got vaccinated, and if that campaign were successful, they could have been spending as much as $500 million on it. But of course, it probably would not have been nearly as successful. So vaccine lotteries and lotteries in general just work. But only to a point. Celia Hodent, a psychologist and game user experience strategist, explained to Wired that you can't go overboard and try to turn everything you want citizens to do into a lottery because it will breed mistrust in the government and potentially in science. And that's probably already happened with some people for the vaccine lotteries. Yeah, it's effective for most people, but it's not ethically great, and Hodent warns it can easily become part of a dark pattern, exploiting attention to change behaviors. So I guess it's good that it's working for now, but hopefully we can continue working on the other factors that address vaccine hesitancy going forward. Of course, all of those things, like better outreach and communication and rebuilding trust in various institutions, will all take a lot more work than earmarking a couple $1 million in a budget. Try as some parents might to deter it, a lot of little girls go through a princess phase at some point. The daughter of English couple Edmund Kingsley and Anna Morrissey, who celebrated her 6th birthday over the weekend, is no different. Well, alright, she's a little different. When asked how she wanted her birthday cake to be decorated, she told her parents, quote, "Well, my friend is getting unicorns, but I think what I'd really like is Henry VIII executing Anne Boleyn with Elizabeth I watching." End quote. Yeah. Really, and the parents delivered. Well, they tastefully just had 3 royals standing around a castle with a little chopping block where Anne Boleyn's head would presumably go. There was no gory action or even weaponry depicted. And as bizarre or unlikely as this request from a 6-year-old may sound, it actually kind of adds up when you hear that the family took a visit to Hampton Court over the Christmas holidays, spurring an obsession with the Tudors on a level that only a 6-year-old's curious energy can produce. You know, some kids go through a dinosaur phase, she went through a Tudor phase. And during lockdown, the family had also been watching a lot of the British children's show Horrible Histories, which teaches history through music and comedy, so the kid really does know her stuff. Now, this Anne Boleyn beheading birthday cake comes fresh on the heels of another young girl who requested a cake depicting the scene from The Lion King when Mufasa dies. And the cake itself is hilarious. Definitely click through to the photos at the link in the show notes. There's just a jolly Leona is 3 in icing beside the corpse of Mufasa as young Simba looks on from atop the cake. It's so morbid and hilarious. Now, the reason for this girl's request was even more clever, though. She apparently said that if the cake showed that tragic scene, everyone would be too sad to eat the cake and there would be more for her. Dang. Clever and awesome kids. Watch out, folks. Once these girls make it through their goth phases in high school, I think they're gonna take over the world. But that's it for today. As always, this show was produced by Ride Home Media and Kottke.org. I am Jackson Bird, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.